Welcome to the AI for Net Zero webinar series. This webinar series is designed to bring together experts and innovators from both the artificial intelligence and the sustainability domain. The overarching goal and theme of this webinar series is to accelerate the progress toward net zero targets. And we aim to engage and inform communities, mainly research communities, about research which cross-cut the AI and sustainability. Today's session will be chaired by myself, Professor Ahmed Sheikh from Harry Watt, and Ming Xia. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello. My name is Meng Jia. I'm currently a PDRA at University of Manchester, and I'm working on a net zero project supervised mainly by Dr. Michael Short, and co-supervised by Dr. Dongda Zhang at the University of Manchester. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And today we have two sessions. We will start with Andrew from Imperial College, and later on we will have Gavers, who will be talking about his own research. So for the first part, we will have Dr. Andrew Mould, who is a research associate at the Department of Aeronautics at Imperial College London. He is a member of the turbulence simulation groups. He holds a PhD from Manchester University, where he worked on multi-fidelity methods for computational fluid dynamics for turbulence flow. He is currently working on one of the AI for net zero projects, and his main focus is in physics-aware machine learning for wind farm optimization. The floor is yours now.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to be talking a bit today about work we've been doing looking at controlling wind farms and using different methods to do that. And so you might have seen wind turbines, kind of more and more wind turbines being built around the country. A lot of them offshore, so kind of in the kind of sea around the UK. There's quite a few large wind farms with lots of wind turbines being built. And the question we're trying to answer is how can we get more power out of these wind turbines just by controlling them, not changing the design or building them bigger or more of them, but just controlling them better. How can we get more power output from them? And so if we look at how we're going to control these wind farms to do that. So here's a nice picture that is often shown of kind of wind farms where we have specific weather conditions that kind of show the flow around some of the turbines in the wind farm. And you can see that kind of in this wind farm, we have a turbine exposed to the wind here, and behind this turbine, kind of a wake appears. And this is an area of lower velocity wind that's kind of turbulent in nature. And it's these wakes that kind of propagate behind all of the wind turbines that kind of cause some issues. And so you can also see here how this wake is then kind of interacting with turbines downstream of that first turbine. And so these turbines then kind of experience lower velocity winds with more turbulence in it, and so output less power. And so you can see kind of in a diagram, if we have the wind coming from the left, looking down on the turbine, the wake will kind of grow out behind the wind turbine. And in that wake, we have a lower velocity. So we have a reduced velocity kind of wind speed in that wake region. We can then control that wind turbine by kind of changing the angle offset to the wind. So rather than pointing it straight at the wind, we can turn it or yaw it around its center. And by doing that, we can actually deflect the wake to one side, depending on which way we turn the turbine. And so by kind of using this control, this yaw mechanism, we can move the wake from side to side. So that's something that we can do to kind of change things in our wind farm. We're able to kind of simulate what happens in a wind farm, and we do that using a high order finite difference flow solver called XCompact 3D, and this has wind kind of turbine modeling features built into it. And we're able to then kind of model the flow around the wind turbines and get a result that looks something a bit like this. So in this case, we have 4 wind turbines, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. And you can see how the kind of vortical structures coming off the front of the wind turbines then break down into a turbulent wake and envelop the turbines behind. So these are the turbines that then have that reduced velocity. You can see here, the turbine on the right is actually yawed offset to the wind direction, whereas the turbine on the left is kind of facing directly towards the wind. And that deflects the wake on the right slightly to the side and exposes the second turbine to slightly more flow. So that's the kind of concept of this wake steering. And if we look at the power output that we get from this kind of these turbines, if we just take 2 of the turbines in a line, so here the red line shows when both of the wind turbines are facing directly at the wind. And you can see this is made up of the power output of the first turbine, which is shown here, which is very steady, and then the power output of the second turbine is fluctuating a lot more and is also down below half of what the first turbine is. So it's going a much less power out of the wind than that kind of ideal conditions of the first wind turbine. If we yaw the first turbine a lot, as is kind of shown by this green case, then the power output of the second turbine increases because it's exposed to more of the kind of free stream flow, but the power of the first turbine decreases. So this kind of rebalances the power output of those different turbines, and we end up getting a total power output from our wind farm that is actually very similar to our baseline case. However, there is an angle in between that you can find that kind of balances these out, and the total power output of the wind farm is then increased compared to our base case. So what we have then is an optimization problem where we want to find what these angles theta are, and we can give us the maximum power output of the kind of summed over all of the wind turbines in our wind farm. This gives us the maximum power from our whole wind farm based on these yaw angles. So we have an optimization problem that we need to find these yaw angles, and one way we can do that is with Bayesian optimization. So Bayesian optimization relies on kind of 2 main components. The first of these is a model. So we need to create a model in a parameter space of what's happening, and that's typically done with Gaussian process regression. And there's some good reasons why that's normally chosen. And that then gives us a mean prediction and also, importantly, a variance that we can calculate from our data points. It then also requires an acquisition function, and this acquisition function allows us to determine where next in our parameter space we should look for our optimum in order to give us as much information as possible about where it might be. So you can see for a kind of analytical test case here, the black dotted line is an exact function that we want to kind of find the optimum of, the maximum. We can create a model through these data points. So if we have a number of data points shown by these stars, we can create a model shown by the blue line that kind of passes through those data points. This model is quite inaccurate in a lot of places because you don't have enough data. But what we then do is use that model to create our acquisition function based off kind of both the mean and the variance of the model, which we can see kind of below here. And then we take the maximum of this acquisition function, and this location here shown by this blue line is where we will do our next experiment in the parameter space, and we add a data point based on that. So if we do that, we then update our model and update our acquisition function, and we can then iterate this process, kind of exploring the parameter space based on this acquisition function. And we will then end up kind of converging towards our optimum solution in the parameter space. So we can apply this Bayesian optimization method to the wind turbines, and we can use different environments kind of to provide our data for this process. So the first of these, here's a kind of a low fidelity optimization, where our environment uses a lower fidelity analytical weight model, that's kind of tuned to match what happens in what is kind of experienced in real turbines. And you can see we kind of iterate through this process. At each iteration, we kind of explore more at the start and kind of then converge towards a maximum kind of power improvement. You can see we create a model through that process of how the kind of efficiency of our wind farm changes over that parameter space of a single turbine yawing. We can also then do that in a higher fidelity environment. So this environment being our large eddy simulations that kind of capture much more of the physics of what's happening in the wind around the turbines. And by kind of including this kind of high fidelity simulation into the optimization, we're able to find a truer optimum that's kind of slightly different to what we see in our low fidelity model. And again, both of these methods take about 10 iterations in order to kind of find our optimum location. The problem with this is these LES simulations are quite expensive. And so what we want to do is combine our low fidelity optimization and our high fidelity optimization together, using the low fidelity to explore the parameter space and the high fidelity to kind of exploit within that. So to do that, this multi-fidelity Bayesian optimization, we need to take our model and our acquisition function and turn them into multi-fidelity equivalents. So for our model, we use a nonlinear autoregressive Gaussian process, and this finds not only then the link between our input space and our output space, being our yaw angles and our power output, but also kind of learns a link between the low fidelity model and the high fidelity model, and can then use that to better predict the kind of output in the high fidelity space. So if we look at how that works, again with an analytical function, if we have an exact function and we have these kind of high fidelity samples of that function in our parameter space, we can create a model that is accurate close to those samples, but away from those samples, has quite a lot high uncertainty, and also deviates from our exact function quite a lot. And that's because we're sampling quite sparsely in our parameter space. If we use our low fidelity approach, we can kind of sample at more locations in our parameter space, getting a better certainty of our model across there. But there are kind of inaccuracies in our low fidelity environment that mean there are some errors introduced. And so by combining these low fidelity data points and these high fidelity data points with this multi-fidelity model, we can then kind of create a model across the parameter space that is much closer to our exact solution, kind of picking up the trend from the low fidelity and fitting it to the high fidelity data points. So that gives us a much better model. And then we can then also develop a multi-fidelity acquisition function that not only chooses the location in the parameter space of our next experiment, but also kind of helps us choose which fidelity environment we should run that in, so either the low or the high fidelity. And you can see if we do the same thing, trying to find the optimum of this dotted line, we have both a low fidelity model and a high fidelity part of our multi-fidelity model. And at each iteration in our optimization, we choose the location of our next experiment in the parameter space based on the acquisition function, and also this red line showing that this next sample should be a low fidelity sample. And we can do a couple of iterations in our low fidelity, and then it switches to choosing a high fidelity sample. And then with very few high fidelity samples, we can find this optimum in our kind of high fidelity space. With very few samples in our high fidelity environment. And we can then apply that to our wind farm. So again, with just 2 turbines, we can find this kind of optimum solution, similar to how we had before, but with far fewer samples in our high fidelity environment. And so we can kind of get a high fidelity result without the kind as much additional computational time. So that's with 2 turbines. We then kind of scaled this up to the kind of a full wind farm setup. So this is a Horns Rev wind farm off the coast of Denmark, which is an 80 wind turbine array. And we control in that the kind of 10 different depths in our wind farm. It's a 10 by 8 wind farm, and we control the front all the same and the next row all the same. So we have a 10-dimensional optimization now. And again, we passed the high fidelity large eddy simulation data and the lower fidelity analytical wake models into our multi-fidelity model. And then we run an optimization based on this. And you can see here that our model chooses to kind of explore a lot more with our fast low fidelity model at the start, and then switches into kind of start sampling with our high fidelity model, and then kind of the high fidelity model starts to take over a lot more towards the end of the optimization process, where it's kind of exploiting the model that we have much more. So we're then able to kind of trade off between exploring the full parameter space with our kind of low fidelity model, and then making sure it's accurate with our high fidelity model. This gives us a set of yaw angles for our wind turbines, where the front turbine is kind of yawed the most, and this kind of decreases as we go deeper into our wind farm. And this is the kind of resulting averaged flow field that we get from that. So you can see how the wakes are being pushed to the side, so that the turbines kind of further downstream are still exposed to more of that free stream wind. And you can see how that drops the efficiency of our front wind turbine, but all of the wind turbines kind of downstream of that front one have an increase in their power output. That means we get a much larger kind of power output from our full wind farm than with no wake steering. And we're able to find here some big increases in our high fidelity environment that you're not able to find with these low fidelity environments. So we really need that additional physics that's introduced with our high fidelity environment. So this is kind of optimization of a kind of in a static sense, where we're given a wind condition and we need to find, giving a long time horizon, what is the optimal configuration of our wind farm. But one of the issues we have with this is that this is not kind of how the wind works. The wind is constantly changing. So we want to be able to adapt to that. And that's where kind of the work we're doing more recently in reinforcement learning comes into place. So the problem we're looking at is the kind of turbulent structures that are interacting with the wake of the wind turbines mean that there's instabilities, and the turbines the wake of the turbines can then move around. So when we're looking at these time averaged power outputs, we're not accounting for any of these effects in our Bayesian optimization. So reinforcement learning gives us a nice way to kind of interact dynamically with our environment. And so our environment passes out a reward and then a kind of state, and pass that into an agent that is then trained to produce an action that we pass back into our environment to produce a new state and reward in this loop. And so when we apply this to a wind farm environment, our action on the right here will be a change in our yaw angles, and the output will be the power output of the wind farm, with the state being some flow measurements that are kind of characteristic of what you might get and be able to obtain in real life. And so you can see how this kind of works for a simple setup with 3 turbines. The turbines are able to dynamically adjust their position because it's kind of sped up a bit, but depending on the wake. And so you see we're getting here some kind of simple kind of yaw steering, where the front turbines are being yawed and the last turbine is staying kind of pointing directly at the wind. So this is kind of a rudimentary control strategy that's kind of picking up that kind of static approach that we had before. And the problem is we needed to train this for longer. So the reinforcement learning is fairly sample inefficient, and we need a lot of data to be able to train this agent. And so what we've done is we've implemented this with parallel environments. So we're able to run multiple wind farm simulations at the same time and pass these back into our agent. And we're able to do this by using the Smart Sim and Smart Redis kind of setup. So the Smart Sim to control multiple different simulations and pass these states, rewards, and actions between these multiple simulations into a in-memory database, and then pass these back to our reinforcement learning algorithm so that they can interact with each other. And this then kind of speeds up the process of learning with these multiple environments, and also passing the information around between our simulations and our reinforcement learning. So we did this then for a 10 turbine setup as kind of being a kind of one row of the Hornrevs wind farm. And we did this with 32 parallel environments, running each environment on 128 cores. And then we interact with the environment every 50 time steps in our simulation. And we kind of batch these up to train our algorithm. And we're able to extract up to kind of 1 million frames for our training. So this is kind of point where you start seeing more complex behaviors captured. So this is some of our initial results on this. At the top, we have the yaw angles of our 10 wind turbines as kind of time progresses. And then below, we have the kind of resulting power output that we get from that. And if we look at the kind of initial kind of training time, you can see at the start, there was a lot of kind of variance in what the different environments were doing. And this reduced quite quickly down, so it started learning what to do. If you go just a couple of episodes further down, you can see that the agent is deciding to now yaw all of the turbines quite a lot, so it's starting to learn to do that wake steering strategy. And we're starting to get some kind of power improvement over our baseline case, but we're not yet able to kind of increase that to the level of the Bayesian optimization. If we look further down in the training, so once it's had a lot more interactions with the environment, we then start seeing some more interesting results where you can see here the different kind of angles of the wind turbines are oscillating around this kind of 0 degree. So it's kind of switching between minus 20 degrees and plus 20 degrees with a kind of time period. And if we look a bit closer at that, you can see actually particularly these turbines towards the back of the wind farm are kind of out of phase, picking up this frequency. And what we think this is doing is picking up that wake meandering, kind of enhancing that to push the wakes to kind of one side and then the other, and the different wind turbines are sensing that happening and reacting to that with a kind of sinusoidal pattern. And again, we're able to increase the power output based on our baseline. We haven't yet reached this kind of increase that we see with the Bayesian optimization, but we are reacting dynamically to the environment that we have. So just in summary, we include physics provided from these large eddy simulation calculations to give us more accurate optimum yaw configurations in an optimization. And particularly, we use this multi-fidelity Bayesian optimization approach to use that physics while still exploring the parameter space with a lower cost wake model to kind of bring down the cost of this optimization. If you're interested, we do also have a preprint available on this work. And more recently, we've been looking at kind of applying reinforcement learning to test kind of dynamic and active control strategies in these wind farm environments. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, for the very interesting talk. For our viewers on YouTube who are watching us live, please add your questions in the chat. I definitely have kind of like a lot of questions because I work on related problems. So I would like to start by asking you, Andrew, in the first part about the strategy of building the multi-fidelity. The approach I am aware of usually, which may be an outdated approach, we build an error model based on the difference between the two. We evaluate the model, low fidelity versus high fidelity, and then that error model we somehow add it. It's an additive error model to the low fidelity Gaussian process regression. I think from your description, you are doing something different than that. Could you just highlight what's the advantage of what you are doing and how they are comparable?
Yeah. So the kind of approach you outlined there, I think is quite a common approach where you kind of model the error. This approach kind of passes the output of the low fidelity as an additional input into your high fidelity model. And the idea behind this is that you can then better capture the non-linear difference between the low and high fidelities. So there's been some work that's kind of compared these approaches. That there's another approach. So we use the nonlinear autoregressive Gaussian process. There's another approach looking at multi-fidelity deep Gaussian processes. It's much more similar to that, to the error estimation kind of method, but it's slightly simplified to kind of help with the speed. But yeah, there's a difference there where you're able to kind of pick up these nonlinear relationships slightly better with these types of models. I think does that answer the question?
Yeah, I kind of like I wanted to know the detail of what you are doing. Is it along that line or slightly different?
It's slightly different to that error addition approach. We have an additional input into the high fidelity part. So you can see kind of here on this, we
I can share that.
train first the low fidelity part, as you might in the with this error addition approach. But then you also, when you then train the high fidelity, you have your inputs into your high fidelity model, but you also pass your
First
input
approximation.
space through your low fidelity model, and then you kind of use the inference from that to simplify as an additional kind of input into your high fidelity part of this model as an additional input, and you're then able to learn how this relationship varies more easily across the parameter space, as well as just that kind of error addition. So you're able to kind of catch these non-linearities better.
We have one comment from David, who's asking, you assume all have the same height. Yeah, it's so I think the question can be rephrased as it's usually in the wind farm, all the wind farms are installed at the same height, and it's because it's industrial process, so you buy with the same wind turbine. Is this study implies that different heights is worth evaluating?
I think so. I think it's interesting. As you say, most wind farms are one height, but maybe that could be changed. I think the kind of difference you might get with the change in height is probably not enough in a lot of cases. I have seen some work where they don't only look at the yaw kind of side to side, but they also look at kind of tilting the turbine so it looks can be pushed up and down, and that can then be used to push the wakes up. I think they've found it's probably not quite as effective because you're still then you're kind of creating these kind of turbulent effects. But yeah, I think there are other controls you can use within your wind turbine. You can change the pitch angles of the blades, the induction factor in the generators and the turbines. So there are a few different controls you can play with that maybe can interact together in some way, which would be interesting to look at, but not something we've done yet.
Thank you, David, for the question, and thanks, Andrew, for the answer. What is I have a question about what's the state of the application point of view. So I understand you are probably like me, more interested in the mathematics of the problem, the challenge of the simulation, and but are you aware of what is being implemented now in the most advanced field? Do they have special kind of controls, rules, or just it's fixed systems?
In currently operating wind farms, you mean?
Yeah.
So I think in most wind farms, the in terms of your control that they do, I don't think many wind farms do that. I think there are some that potentially are starting to introduce it, but most of them, the control they do is they sense the wind direction and point all the wind turbines straight at the wind. So I think there's a kind of, it depends exactly on the wind, what the wind is doing at a specific time, and the turbine layout and how you then yaw it. But we've seen in this configuration kind of a maximum kind of power output increase of maybe 30%, which is a huge power boost that is kind of essentially almost for free, because you just have to turn the turbines to a different angle.
So why, in your opinion, you might think they are leaving this on the unexploited quick win of even if we don't achieve 30%, it's 30% like you installed 30% less wind turbine, which is huge, or you install, you save even 10% could be huge in terms of investment. What is the barrier for them to implement such techniques? This is
I think so. There's a couple of parts. One is with different wind conditions, this changes. It's not always quite so high, and that's something we're trying to start looking at. But also, a lot of these turbines are not they're not designed with this kind of operation kind of in mind, and so they haven't been tested enough at these kind of slightly yawed angles. So they're unsure on the structural implications of that. Although you can see, and it showed earlier on, that the kind of fluctuations that you can also drop the kind of fluctuations that you get on the turbines. So this would hopefully also kind of decrease that cyclic loading that you would get on the kind of downstream turbines. So that I think there's a worry about kind of structural loading. I think there's studies that show this also drops the structural loading, specifically those cyclic ones that are particularly damaging. So I think it's just trying to understand better the flow physics and the interactions between the structures and the flow physics that kind of we need before we can roll this out more widely.
very good. Thank you for the answer. We don't have any other question. Mingxia, do you have any questions?
Just out of curiosity, for a quick one, did you include any constraints in your Bayesian optimization? If so, how did you incorporate it?
So we, other than kind of maximum yaw angle, we didn't really have any additional constraints on our optimization.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation.
So we have one last comment, if you can manage to take a minute on this, which is again from David asking us, 30% increase is huge. How much on average, and what would be the cost of management?
Yeah, 30% is massive. That's in this case you can see at the top here, where all of the wind turbines are lined up exactly with the wind direction. So if you do have if the wind direction was kind of perpendicular to that, your control wouldn't have any effect. You wouldn't be able to get any advantage. So there's kind of that would be the peak. It would drop quite a lot as you look at different kind of wind directions and turbine layouts. But yeah.
Okay, given the time, we would like to thank you, Andrew, again for your very interesting talk. And now I think we should move to the our next speaker. Our next speaker, somebody have removed him. Gavers will be our next speaker. He holds a PhD in plant science, so we have a big shift from aerospace to plant science. He has his PhD from the University of Nottingham and Erasmus research. His doctoral research focused on utilizing molecular biology and data analysis technique to identify novel candidate genes involving in anaerobic germination tolerance in rice, a critical trait for adopting direct seeded rice. He worked his work during his PhD sparked a deep interest in climate change and emission reduction within agriculture. So this is what he's doing now as a research fellow on one of the AI for Net Zero projects at the University of Leicester. He's working on predictive modeling of carbon dioxide emissions from arable peatlands under different crop types. His research emphasizes how the soil microbiome responds to various cropping scenarios and how these changes impact carbon dioxide emission. Without further ado, Gavers, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and thank you for inviting me. So, I'm a research fellow at the University of Leicester. I'm working on a wider project, self-learning digital twins for sustainable land management. It's a joint project between the University of Leicester, University of Loughborough, and the University of Bristol. If you've been following this webinar series, you may have heard from Professor Heiko Blazer, who is the PI of the project, who gave an excellent overview of what the wider project seeks to achieve. So for my part, specifically, I'm interested in how different crop choice affect the soil microorganisms and how this in turn drive carbon dioxide emission from arable peatlands. So by way of background, natural peatlands, also referred to as wet peatlands, store significant amounts of carbon and so are important carbon sink. They hold about 1/3 of global carbon stock, considering the fact that they comprise only 3% of global soil. Here in the UK, peat comprises almost half of the UK soil carbon. But over 100 years ago, natural peatlands were converted to arable peatlands through drainage for agricultural purposes. And so as this figure here seems to illustrate, so this is a natural peatland, this is how it looks. It's covered by water, and so the carbon stored cannot be decomposed and are sequenced. However, if you drain the water and convert that for agricultural purposes to become arable peatlands, then there's no water, and then the peat is exposed to oxygen. This leads to a shift in the microbial composition. So in the natural peatlands, the microorganisms here are mostly anaerobic microorganisms because they can exist without oxygen when the water surface is flooded. If this shifts to drained peatlands, then the microbial community becomes aerobic, and then they involve in aerobic decomposition. This process releases significant amount of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and this is a cause of concern. In the UK, arable peatlands are responsible for 4% of the UK net greenhouse gas emission. The UK wants to achieve net greenhouse gas emission by the year, net zero emission by the year 2050. And so there's a need to mitigate emission from arable peatlands. So this is the map of the English peat. So here in the north, so the brown indicate deep peat, and then the green indicates shallow peat. So all that's here in the north. Towards the east is where you find most of the brown, that is the deep peat. This is an extended map of it. Here we are showing where the areas that have been converted for arable peatlands around these areas or have been drained for agricultural purposes. Some policymakers are advocating for these whole areas to be rewetted, to be returned to their natural state. However, some stakeholders also think this is not a pragmatic solution, considering the fact that this area produces 37% of UK's vegetables. It is home to about 4,000 farms and employ about 80,000 people with a market value of about £3.1 billion. So this is quite enormous, and going to reweight the whole place may jeopardize the UK food security and also compromise the local economy. But something needs to be done. So what are the choices that we have? So land use management practices, that is the type of crops that can be planted, a type of crop rotation, whether to do tillage or not tillage. And these are the practices that can be managed to ensure that greenhouse gas emissions are mitigated from agricultural lands. So when it comes to this conversation, one thing that remains a black box is the role of the microbiome. Mainly due to their complex nature, many people overlook how they can be exploited to ensure that greenhouse gas emission is mitigated. However, various studies have linked their role to climate change mitigation and also soil health, mainly due to two roles that they play. So microorganisms play these two important roles. One is mineralization of soil organic carbon, that is the conversion of complex organic compounds to simpler forms and also inorganic forms for plants to be able to take it up. And two is stabilization of carbon inputs into organic forms. So the balance between these two important processes dictates the flux of CO2 and methane emission to the atmosphere. So that's why the soil microbiome is of great importance when it comes to mitigating greenhouse gas emission from agricultural fields. And the need to understand the role they play is crucial in be able to exploit their usefulness. So previous studies have demonstrated that different crops will have different microbiome composition. This is because different crops have different root exudates. The root exudates are chemical substances that plants secrete from their roots into the soil, and this governs the microbial community that surrounds the roots. And different crops have got different root exudates. And so the hypothesis that I was testing in this study is if we have different crop scenarios, we are going to have different crop microbial profile. Will this impact CO2 emission coming from the soil? So this was an on-farm research that I undertook, and I compared a wheat field to a sugar beet field, and an onion field, and then we had a bear field as a control. So this field previously have been cultivated, but for this particular year, it was just bear with nothing on it. This is important because farmers have crop rotation, and different crops go into the crop rotation. So it's important to know if a particular crop will give less emission, then farmers will be able to prioritize this in their rotation methods. So I'm sharing with you some of the field data that I gathered. So mainly sampling soil for DNA isolation to be able to gain any information from the soil microbiome, both fungi and bacteria. The first point is to isolate DNA, so sampled in the wheat field, sugar beet, onion from the bear field at 3 different depths, so 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters, and then 20 centimeters. And at this same depth, soil temperature was taken, soil moisture, and then carbon dioxide fluxes. So this is my colleague, Dr. Ursula Davis, having me on the field somewhere in Downham Markets in the middle of the Peat region for field data collection. And then I also conducted some lab work, so the DNA isolation, mostly quality check of the DNA, and then soil pH measurements, and then DNA sequencing. So this is roughly the pipeline for trying to tease any information from microbial organism from the soil. First step is to collect soil samples, isolate DNA, do a PCR to identify the desired variable region to target for sequencing, followed by sequencing and then data analysis. So the first part of the project, I wear a cap as a A wet lab biologist went to the field, collected data, collected soil samples, brought it to the lab for DNA isolation. So this is my extraction kit here, and then getting the DNA, then going to ahead to do sequencing. And then I've just got data in, and I've started doing the analysis for the bacterial, and still waiting data on the fungal part. So I'm going to share with you some of the results I've just performed. So here, the first thing we normally look at is to look at the bacterial richness, which we use the ACE, which is the abundance-based coverage estimator, which more or less kind of counts the total amount of species that are identified, and then also channel diversity index, which is based on alpha diversity, so kind of measures the diversity within the samples. So for the species richness, it appears that the sugar beet field had the highest number of bacteria at it when sampled at 20 centimeters. So the trend was, it seems to, bacterial richness seems to increase with depth in the sugar beet field, and this was kind of a similar pattern with the onion. This was expected because these two are root tuber, so they all kind of go into the soil. So probably that's why this was observed, but this was not the case in the wheat field and also in the bare land. So for the diversity, seems to a similar trend also here, but there was a lot of variation within the data when it comes to the channel diversity index. However, the 20 centimeters depth for sugar beet seems to be one of the highest in terms of the diversity. So there was a lot of species, but it was also highly diverse as well. So all these are useful information that will be helpful going forward. And then I also wanted to understand whether there are commonalities in terms of species identified across field, and this was the case. So at all the depths, we found a lot of bacteria species that were common on all the 4 different fields. So at 5 centimeters, more than 2,000 species were common, and this seems to increase as we go down the depth. But importantly, we also identified that there were bacterial species that were specific to each of the fields and also each of the depths. And so this is quite important and something that can be explored as we go further with regards to building the model. So here I'm just showing the top 10 abundant bacteria based on a phylum, and this also seems to vary among the different fields. Even if you take the same field here in the sugar beet field, you could see that, more importantly, we're interested in actinobacteria because they are involved in breaking down complex organic matter into simpler forms. So it caught our attention that it was among the top 10 at the phylum level, but it also varied among treatment. Even in the sugar beet field, it seems to reduce as we go down. So there seems to be at the upper space breaking down organic compound at that stage. So this is the trend of CO2 emission that we measured on the field. In July, where the bare field was bare, there was nothing growing there from the picture I showed earlier. So it was all cleared. There seems to be higher emission of CO2 from the bare field at that point. However, after a month, so this data was collected over a 3-month period from July to September. In about a month time, there was a lot of vegetation on that plot, and emissions seems to have reduced. So this is important information because farmers practice crop rotation, and sometimes there are gaps in between their planting. So some farmers will just leave the land bare, will just clear it and leave it, and some farmers will grow cover crops. So it's important to know whether the bare land have higher emission or not. And so from this point, there seems to be not much difference in terms of emission from the other fields. However, the bare field, when it was bare, there was nothing growing, and this was expected because plants during photosynthesis take up CO2 and give up oxygen. So if there's nothing growing, then the soil coming from the CO2 coming from the soil, nothing is taken up and it's all going to the atmosphere. And so that indicates that bare field should be avoided. Farmers should be able to plant something in between to avoid this. But interestingly, we also found that at that particular time, soil moisture was quite low at the bare field, also due to evapotranspiration. There's nothing growing. The sun hits straightly on the surface of the bare field, and so there will be evaporation of water vapor, leading to the field becoming less amount of water in the soil. So from here, it could appear that soil moisture is also one of the right driving factors for CO2 emission. But the major task now is to be able to link emission to particular or specific bacterial species that we identified. So that's the major task that I've started working on. So this is a challenge because the data is quite high dimensional. So it's 60 observations, but we have about 8,000 variables, 8,900 variables. So these are the individual bacteria that were identified, and we are using their relative abundance to be able to do this. So I've done a few things that when you encounter high dimensional data, you normally do to do some feature engineering. So first of all, I try to do feature selection using recursive feature elimination to eliminate non-important features to bring down the number. So this brought down the number a bit further, and also remove highly correlated features. The cutoff was 0.9, but going forward, I'm thinking of maybe reducing it a bit further. And I tried different models, random forests, and other models. But what seems to be giving me a bit better coefficient of determination was the extreme gradient boost model, which gave me about 0.57. However, as the scatter plot here indicates, it's still underfitting, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But just to show that here we see a lot of the bacteria. So the OTUs here, these are numbers, but they correspond to specific bacteria species that we could go back to have a look at to see which bacteria species is this. We'll be able to explore the functions of them, and then going forward, we'll be able to do more research to see if eliminating such bacteria from the field, for instance, will lead to a lower emission. So this is work still ongoing, and the major task here is to be able to do introduce more methods that will be able to reduce the high dimensionality of the data and get a proper model. So by way of conclusion, we've identified that the bacterial diversity, it varies in terms of diversity and abundance among the different fields, and this offer more potential for future research to explore much into this. And also I'm working on improving the model prediction, and also incorporation of the fungal data sets, which will give kind of a similar problem as I'm having with the bacteria, to be able to work on that. So I'd like to thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Gavers, for this very interesting talk. I have to say, I'm learning a lot. For our viewers online, please add your questions in the chat as them arrive to our system, and we can ask the speaker. As a chair, I can ask the first question. I would like to look into your data where you showed the figure and you were doing the cross plots there. That's there's a slide after this one.
Oh, this one.
Yeah. I sometimes I do understand the challenge of collecting data, but in the same time, do you think this data is enough to work with the number of features you have? As you're not seeing, like, where is the biggest, in my opinion, where is the biggest win? You could say to me that this is only data I can have access to, or it can be collected. And I need to, this is a constraint bigger than me, but would you advise that people collect more data?
Yeah, that's very true. So when it comes to the sequencing, mostly the cost is a problem. So we're able to do this because of the cost. But that is a big challenge, because if the observation is not very high, and because you have a high number of variables, then that presents a challenge. Because the other thing is I also have fungal data, which is going to have almost the same variable size in thousands. If I want to combine that with the bacterial data, for instance, that is even going to create a bigger challenge. But ideally, that would have been a better integration to see if to combine both the bacterial and fungal data to see if maybe they have any kind of connections instead of doing that separately. But if I was to repeat this, probably I'd like to do collect more data. But I will also have to point out that we were limited. We were also limited, aside the financial side, as to the amount of data that we could collect from the field, because this is mainly farm based on farm research. So I didn't have to kind of cultivate the wheat field myself. So I roll out emails to farmers in this region, but because farmers are very busy people, so we can only work with farmers that responded to us and to use their field. So actually, the plan that I had from the onset, I had to modify it because initially I wanted to do more, to also explore crop rotation methods, but we were limited about the number of farmers who were happy, especially that was a busy period for them who were happy to allow us on their field. So that also kind of limited us in a way with regards to the samples that we could take. But I'm looking into whether I'll be able to bring in other published data sets. But the challenge is mineral soil is very different from peat soil. And all microbiome data sets that I could find online were either done on maybe grasslands or other fields, which obviously the difference is going to be that high. So to be able to incorporate anything that is not on peat will not help me to achieve what I want to get.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your comprehensive answer and highlighting the difficulties which a mathematician or computational person cannot see of collecting the real data or finding similar data which might look similar from the outside, but when you look into it, they are different data. So that's I think it begs a call that everybody try to publish their own data as an open source. Maybe it would be useful for somebody. Maybe somebody is sitting on data which could be helpful to enrich your own study, but you have no access to it as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I will pass the microphone. There's two comments here. Okay, Mendria, do you want to take turn here to moderate this one?
Yeah, sure. So there is a question from the chat. First one is, what are the most promising model improvements that you are looking at now? So I think it's asking like, if you're trying to improve the model, what are the metrics you are looking at? Yeah.
Yeah, so my thinking is to do something like lasso regression, to be able to select maybe it can help me to select features that can help predict kind of, because I was looking into it and it's able to handle small data sets. So that's my first kind of point of call now to look at lasso regression to see if that helps. If not, I'll continue to explore more.
All right, and there is another question. So he mentioned that your results suggest that the observations are not independent. How do you deal with that potential issue? Do you have any idea about the dependency structure? So like, how about like the data you collect, mostly for the data collection part? Yeah.
Yes, so that's a good question, but it's not something I have an answer to. I'm not kind of a very core informatics person, but there is the expertise within our team, and I'm hoping to kind of consult more with them to be able to help deal with these issues.
Cool. I have a follow-up question regarding the features. So for the feature selection, did you do some like clustering to see if there is some like specific features that you notice regarding the bacteria?
Yes, so I did a PCA, for instance. I did a PCA to see whether I'll be able to select the topmost PCAs to go ahead to build a model with. I tried that, but still the coefficient of determination was quite lower compared to this one. that's why I didn't go by that method. But I've explored different clustering methods to actually to see.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think we have any other questions from the chat. So I would like to take the chance to thank Gavert again for his interesting talk and for the very comprehensive and informative um, answer to the questions. And I would like to announce the next session, which will take place next Tuesday, the 22nd of October, at 2 p.m. UK time, as usual. And in that session, Professor Piahu Lee from Loughborough University will be presenting an AI and digital twin for sustainable agriculture. So please follow us and check the YouTube channel for the pre-announcement. And on behalf of the UKRI AI for Net Zero program, which funds 7 projects across different universities in the UK, we are hosting a conference on AI for Net Zero, and it will take place on between the 16th and 19th of December 2024 at the University of Exeter. And we will have the same theme as the webinar. We will bring leading experts and high-profile speakers to discuss how AI can drive meaningful progress toward achieving net zero by 2050. And we invite a diverse community from aeronautics to plant science to grid management to subsurface engineering. So everybody who's working at the intersection of sustainability and AI is welcome to submit abstracts for either talks or posters. The deadline for the abstract have been extended. It's in 2 days on the 17th of October. So please submit. The link for that will be shown here down there, and it will be also on the comments on the YouTube channel. Thanks again to the 2 speakers, Andrew and Gabbers, for the very exciting talks, and thanks to my co-host, Menji, and thanks to our project manager, Annie May, who is handling a lot of the organization behind the scenes. And looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you and goodbye.